Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show. Welcome to MS&Me Interviews. I am your host, Erica Lyons Richardson. Today we continue with part 2 of our topic, Funding the Cure, with guest Dr. Travis Stiles, CEO of Novaron Bioscience Inc. Novaron is a private biotech company developing novel therapeutic approaches in the treatment of multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury, and glaucoma. We now continue with part 2.
The problem with MS is it's double complicated when you're talking about the brain. Because if you're trying to treat, imagine this. Imagine you're trying to make an eczema treatment, and you can use a cream and stick it on the skin. It's pretty low-hanging fruit. You can test a lot of stuff. Versus if you want to treat something in the stomach, well, you can eat things, and that goes to the stomach. It's not as easy as on the skin, but you can do it. Versus something that's in the liver. It gets a little bit more complicated at every stage. But when you start talking about the brain is lit from the peripheral circulation. Mm-hmm. Your brain doesn't persist off blood. There's what's called the blood-brain barriers. I'm sure you guys are all aware, where you don't want things like antibodies or peripheral immune cells getting into your brain. That's the reason you have MS, is because you have unwanted infiltration of immune cells that get all fired up and do bad things. So when you're starting to get into a situation like that, it adds an entirely new level of complexity that we're not great at. And that's why, one of the things that makes me really passionate about what I do is a lot of good brain drugs I don't think are failing in clinical trial always because they don't work. I think because the extra level of complexity of the brain is not being adequately accounted for in the preclinical development, and then you're not giving the drug a good enough chance to do its best functions in an actual human. So, you're doing these really crude animal models, you give the animal a drug and you see some effect in its brain, but that step between what dose, what duration, how well does it get in the brain in a human isn't always being adequately accounted for. And so you get false negatives. And I think, Novaron's mentality is we always do everything we can to avoid the false negative, because it's not like cancer. If you do something, like you might have the best drug in the world, but if you don't know how to deliver it, what concentration it needs to get into in the brain, what administration protocol you need to use to get it to that concentration, for how long, all these really boring questions that are brain specific that don't need to necessarily need to be accounted for as much in other diseases, then you might literally ruin a good drug by making it look like it fails in clinical trial just because you used it wrong.
Right.
And because these diseases are so incredibly impactful, expensive, devastating, we've always been extra dedicated and committed to this preclinical development side so that we don't make those same mistakes. Our number one goal is that if we get into the clinic and our drug fails, we want to be certain with no level of doubt that our drug failed because it didn't work, period. Because otherwise, I don't ever want to look back and be like, man, I wonder if I had done it this way, if it might have worked. Because that would mean that I might have messed it up and not helped people that would otherwise get helped. Yeah. But I have the agility, I have the ability, I have the flexibility to do that, because I can focus on this part right here, right now, knowing that at some stage, if I develop this drug appropriately, pharma companies can partner with me, and they can take their part, and they can do the part that they do really well. I don't ever need to be a manufacturing and distribution. I don't ever need to have a sales force. Those guys already do that better than I could ever do. The part where I come in, and this is the part that I don't think people recognize as much, is bridging that gap between the academic basic science discoveries and the pharma drug development. I can take and focus on just this niche of the early stage clinical, preclinical mentality, and I can focus on making the best drug possible. And that's the benefit of being me versus a company that's trying to do an Alzheimer's drug in a 200,000 person company who's limited to the bureaucracy. They have demands that I don't have to think about. They have shareholders and quarterly profit reports and all these other things where external pressures and indicators of success or failure that have nothing to do with how good a single drug is are driving business decisions. I can focus on one thing. And, I think when it comes down to the kind of general topic, the funding topic, I think that's the part that kind of gets frustrating, is because there always needs to be more money for research, period. I mean, the part of the reason that America is the innovation dominant country that it is because we put more money into public research than most other country or any other country, to the best of my knowledge. And because of that, we have more patents, we have more companies that grow and spin out. And that all generates revenue that stays in the States. So I'm not saying we take any money away from there. On the pharma side, pharma companies have a ton of cash. And if they need more, they have established track records where they can raise capital from institutional investors.
Right.
It's very easy because they are established groups with a low risk that people, when they pump money into, they can have a very high level of certainty that they'll at least get some of their money back at a decent rate of return. But when it comes to a company like mine, where we technically are for profit because we have to be, because we're trying to develop a product, we're not just trying to research things. We're riskier, we're smaller, and so the private investment isn't there. Additionally, nonprofits and institutes like and public research agencies don't typically invest into companies of any form. Unless it's as a contract. There's contracts, but usually that's because they have a specific need and they'll find people that can fill that need. And so for a long time, this was a valley of death. They literally called it the valley of death, where this gap between discovery and clinical development was just not being filled. Now, one of the best things that our government has done is when they made the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration created a program called the Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR. And that SBIR program basically said we need something to fill the translational gap. The translational gap being that valley of death between discovery and development. Because what they were seeing is that universities were developing a whole bunch of really exciting patents and intellectual property that was just accumulating. And there wasn't enough people to take that and develop it because it was really early stage. And pharma isn't good at that early stage stuff. And so they thought to themselves, well, how can we catalyze the transfer of that intellectual property into people that will develop it, and how do we facilitate a good development process? And so the Small Business Administration said, well, look, we're investing 100% in academic research. It's not going anywhere. What if we take a small amount of that funding and put it into the translational side? And so they created the SBIR program, which basically mandated that I think it's 3% of all government-funded research had to go into small businesses doing translational work, bridging this gap. And so that's where that program came from, and that's what Novaron's been 100% founded on. And we're looking at the $2 million mark where we've raised money on that now. And I would encourage people to kind of look at some of our website stuff and some of our press releases.
Yes.
We've done a good job. I mean, I feel like
amazing.
And $2 million for what we've accomplished, I would argue, is incredibly efficient because we're balling on a budget over here, right?
Right.
But because the thing is most people know about the NIH. Most people know about the DoD. Most people know about the National Science Foundation. They know about Michael J. Fox. They know about the National MS Society. They know about all these things. Very few people know about the Small Business Administration SBIR program.
Right.
And so in an era where budgets are always scrutinized and where cuts are always being looked at, it's easy for politicians to always look at this small program and look at it as a place where they can cut without a huge backlash.
Exactly. They don't even look into what the program actually did. They're just like, oh, okay, well, if we have to cut one, let's cut that one.
And I will say this, I don't want to paint a disproportionately dire picture. The research that's been done on this particular program has shown that the return on investment for this small 3% of money that we spend on research has a dramatically higher return on investment than the other 97%. And that's not to say that we should change the proportion. I personally think we should increase all research funding and maybe tweak the ratio a little bit better. But that's one of the things that a lot of even the most fiscally conservative kind of like deficit hawks out there will note is they'll be like, well, granted, this is easy to justify because nobody knows about it, but it's really one of the few things we invest in as a public research that we know makes money. And so there are a lot of people out there that advocate for us, but obviously as the larger the cuts that start being talked about need to be, the quicker that we start getting put on the chopping block. Right. And that's caused problems for us because in this new era of, in the Trump era, for better or worse, and people have their different opinions, science funding was immediately put on the chopping block. Trump wanted to make a 20% cut across the board, and that put a lot of people under a microscope. And we had opportunities for funding that were no longer there anymore as a result.
Right.
And so, it honest to God put us under the gun where we we almost shut down. We almost had to shut down. In fact, my founding partner, and there's actually three of us, and we ran out of money and had to scrape together, cashed out our retirement, went to friends and family, took out loans to keep the lights on long enough while we tried to keep stuff together. And here's the thing. I love what I do. I have no regrets about that. I feel passionate about what I do, and I'm fortunate to wake up every morning and know why I go to work. But it's unfortunate because do we really want to live in a society where it's that hard for people to innovate? That's the part that bugs me.
Yeah.
It came to the point where it would have been easier for me to quit, and that's not good for any of us.
No.
And so that's the part that I never want to make it sound like woe is me, because I'm fortunate. But at the same time, I can promise you that many people like me in the last 6 months have fallen off out of the field and given up because it's easier.
And it's scary to think what was in those labs that now may never come to fruition or may take much, much longer to come to fruition.
And honestly, both things are true, because there are some of those things that were developed far enough that the intellectual property was strong, that now that they've stopped, other people can't do that work because it's protected through somebody else.
Right.
And that just should never happen. And I'll say this, when it comes to the money that the government spends on stuff, our investment in science and innovation and all these things is by far one of the things that we get more back in return than we put in.
Yes.
And it makes me upset when we are discussing making massive cuts to one of the things that doesn't just benefit people, but also makes the American economy dominant. That bothers me. But again, I don't want to mean to be political, but so the good news is for us is kind of after the last 6 months of everybody being terrified all the time that, that the bluster surrounding Trump's proposed 20% cut to the NIH wasn't going to come true. The NIH basically said, okay, well, we need to get back to work and do our job, because they had been bracing for cuts. Right. And part of that is because they fund research that can be 5, 6, 7 years long that they're already committed to. So in the last few grant cycles, when they were looking at funding new things and they're worried about a 20% cut in budget, they were not funding any new grants because they didn't want to take money away from grants they'd already funded. So we were literally looking at almost, a dramatic reduction in the amount of new grants that were being funded. And so when things kind of didn't go the kind of scariest route possible, they started saying, we got to get back to work. We got to fund stuff. And so the most recent grant cycle seems to be kind of back to business as usual, with this kind of underlying fear that if the government shuts down, we're all kind of in a bad boat again.
Yeah, it'll be that worst case scenario again.
Exactly. But the good news is Novaron had 2 grants in submission last cycle. Both of them got reviewed pretty well, but one of them got a score that if there's any grants funded this next cycle, it's almost impossible for us not to get it.
That's amazing. That's great.
And we're really lucky, and I'm super excited, and it's this really big relief because now we know we don't have to shut down our doors, and I don't have to feel guilty about not curing the disease. But the problem is that grants take time. So the money that we're looking to get doesn't come in until March or April,
right?
And we ran out of money in September. Yeah. And so again, like when we talk about social safety nets. When people who get in a car accident can't work, and maybe they might be the smartest person in the world, but we have Social Security, we have disability that can support them until they can get back to the workforce, and we do that because that person falling out of the workforce, becoming homeless, being systemically impoverished, takes them out of the running altogether, and they can no longer contribute to society, despite the fact that they could have a really strong impact.
Right.
The problem is we have things like that in academia. We have academic institutes where if a researcher's good and they run out of funding from the NIH or whatnot, there's buffers. There's kind of slush funds where it can keep them afloat. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows that if a big enough company has trouble, we'll bail them out for better or worse. But for us, we know that we have a solid chunk of money coming in that will keep us going for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And we have been looking at having to potentially shut our doors, lay everybody off, and then start back up when the money comes in.
Right, it's hard.
And not only is it hard, but now it takes some of that money that would otherwise go to research, that would go to pushing the ball down the field and getting closer to a cure, and it makes it have to go to scouting a new space, hiring new people, all over again. So that wastes time and money. And so, I will say this: I have a really good group of partners, and we've done everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. We value our employees. We value the work we're doing. We don't want to have to risk that kind of stuff happening. But it's tough, and I'll be honest with you. So, we've actually started a You Caring campaign to kind of bridge some of the gap. I won't promote that too much, but I think, Erica, you're I don't know if you were going to post that somewhere or whatnot, but
absolutely, we're going to actually post that on our website at www.msandmemedia.com. That's msandmemedia.com. And if you want to go straight to the You Caring account, you can go to www.youcaring.com/Travis Stiles. That's TravisStiles -1016145. And I want to jump in here because I am so passionate about the work that Nevron has been doing in the past few years. I'm an advanced MSer. So the work that's in their lab that gets halted when they do not have funding, when they have to stop everything they do, and God forbid ever shutter the doors, the work that was in that lab that now does never come to market could be what honestly can help me walk again. Could be what helps me reach out both arms and hold my children again. Could be what takes my fellow MSers, from the wheelchair to the walker and beyond. And I get very passionate and very angry when it becomes down to dollars. Innovation and science should never come down to arguing over dollars, especially in, civilized society and the greatest nation in the world. We should never have to worry about things that are this important and this innovating getting funding. It really shouldn't be a fight, but it is. So now we go from there. And I want to make sure that all of us get the word out about this You Caring account, because this science has to go forward. We have all been saying for years in the MS community, well, if it comes down to them actually being able to heal the damage done to me, then I'll do anything. I'll take any pill, any shot, any, whatever, cut my head off and put it in my body. That's how passionate we've been about it. So let's get that passionate about keeping this program going, about keeping these doors open and this science going forward. And I'm sorry to get on my soapbox, but these are lives we're talking about here, and this is function, and this is, it's staying here long enough functional to, be there when my kid scores his first goal, be there when he scores his first basket, and be there when they walk across that stage at graduation. So when these programs and this research, we're talking about nationwide. This is happening and they're losing funding. So all of this research needs to go forward for whatever disease we're talking about. And this one in particular is affecting us, listeners. So we need to rally and we need to make this happen. And we need to make sure that they stay going until their grant does come through in a few months, so they're not wasting vital funds on getting set back up to where they were again. We want them to pick up right where they left off, because think about it. When they are delayed, that's longer before it gets to us. And I asked Dr. Stiles several years ago how long it would be, and if he got extra funding, how long could he speed this up? Could you speed this up a couple years for patients like me who are more advanced, who are losing friends every day in the MS community, and the treatments didn't reach them fast enough? How long is it going to be? And he got tears in his eyes. And that's when I knew that he really cared about us and he was trying to make this happen. And it wasn't just about a paycheck to him, and it wasn't just a career to him. He is passionate about, spinal cord patients. He's passionate about MS patients. He's passionate about the science and getting it to us quick as he can. So I really want to get this out there. It will be on our website. And I'm sorry I took over the stage from you, Dr. Stiles.
No, it's good to have somebody else be the one.
So pick up where you left off.
No, I really appreciate that. It's I'll be honest. Like, one of the things about this campaign that's been much needed for me is, when as a company, you spend a lot of time writing grants, you spend a lot of time trying to find private investors, and you hear a lot of no. And it gets discouraging because you start to feel like other people don't necessarily value what you're doing. And the other part of this is, I'm just a guy. I'm literally a dude from Idaho who has no business being a neuroscientist to begin with, let alone thinking he can cure diseases. And so you start to forget that people care. I've always been really patient about the patient side of things, because otherwise, if I wasn't, I wouldn't do science, because it's incredibly hard. But
it's not easy.
It is not. It's been really refreshing, and it's kind of rebooted me and my spirits to see the response that we've had, and to know that people out there also kind of share our passion, and that to remember that why are we doing this? There's real people that could benefit from this. And I remember when we had that conversation about how quickly could we make this happen? How much money would it take to make it happen quicker? And the thing that is hard is, I get that a lot. I try to make myself available as much as I can to people. One, so I can understand the patient experience, because I think that's valuable. And two, because in the meantime, while we're trying to make this drug be the best drug possible, I still want to be able to help, because I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of disservices done to the patient community. And so I feel like that's something I can do in the meantime while I'm trying to get this drug to be the best drug it can be. And I always really struggle with that question, because the truth is, I don't know. I don't know, and I would love to give people the answer that they want to hear. I would love to be more optimistic, but I think false hopes or misrepresenting the truth
it doesn't help either.
It's really dangerous, even. There's a lot of people out there that try to exploit people's desperation, and those people are, again, I don't want to get all fired up, but those are some of the worst people. It's just wrong. And so, it's always tough for me, because I feel like it's important to be honest and give the right answer, the honest answer. But that answer is not fun.
No,
it's also not hopeless, though. I don't want to sit here and paint a picture to say that we won't be able to help people sooner rather than later. I hope that's the case, and I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just, I don't want to misrepresent the realities, and the realities are, this is tough. This is really tough. But
getting it to the point from where you're at and what you're seeing in your lab to the point that it's being administered to a patient like me, that's a long process. And we're not telling you it's coming tomorrow, people.
But I will say this, part of the benefit of doing what we're doing is, people, there's a lot of reasons to criticize our government. A lot. I mean, in any government, because managing 300 million people has got to be hard.
It's hard. It's not an easy job.
But our government, the people that work in places like the FDA, the NIH, the NSF, these people, they are not doing it for the paychecks, I can assure you. And there are a lot of really excellent programs that are designed exactly for situations like this. And because of that, there are things that will make this happen faster than it would for other diseases. We can get orphan designation, we can get fast track, we can get all sorts of stuff. And those things exist because people understand the urgency and the need. And so, and I would say this too, as a personal note, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of rhetoric as of late about getting rid of some of the rigor surrounding clinical trials and just letting drugs get approved if they don't kill people. I want to say, as for my 2 cents, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
I'll second that.
Because, there's nothing stopping people from just putting sugar pills into people and saying, hey, it didn't kill you, let's use this to treat your horrible disease. So I do think that is one kind of like PSA I can throw out there, that that doesn't help anybody. That is a very dangerous, oversimplified piece of rhetoric that I think people should be very conscious of and not fall victim to, because they're they're really desperate for something. Because for everything that might actually work is going to be 20 things that are terrible.
Does the system need to be streamlined? Yes. It does. Absolutely. Does the cost, everything that goes into this, does that need to be looked into? Yes. There can be improvements made from all the way from the laboratory all the way to the shelf at your pharmacy. However, There's a reason these things take so long. There's a reason they cost so much. It's not all some big conspiracy theory. There's a lot of science and years and sweat, blood, and tears that goes into all of this. There's legislation that cannot be averted. There's reason things happen the way they happen. And if you want to change, if you want to know more, it's easier than just hearing something on social media. Oh, well, they're doing this because of that. Look into it yourself. Do some reading, do some research, and become a patient advocate.
Yep.
Patient advocacy can get things fast-tracked. Patient advocacy can get legislation changed.
Absolutely.
So get involved. Get involved in the process.
And I will say this, I already gave Brett a shameless plug for his stuff. But one of the reasons that I've been involved with both MS&Me and Brett is because you guys have done great work for the right reasons as patient advocates, and that's super important and quasi rare because there's business concerns that often trump that no pun intended the more practical altruism.
That's true.
But I will say this: if you want to be an advocate, you can't be a quarterback couch quarterback,
armchair quarterback.
Armchair quarterback. You gotta be willing to put in the work.
You do,
because I know a lot of really amazing, well-intentioned, smart people that are actively hurting the MS community because they take sound bites, they take misinformation, they take people that are exploiting their desperation, and they start propagating it as gospel.
Yes.
And it becomes a religion. It becomes a religion of desperation. And I've always been extremely impressed with Erica, yours and Brett.
Oh, thank you.
Your willingness to not only hear other points of view when you do feel one way, but your ability and desire to, when you hear any perspective, to dig in and figure out for yourself what the truth really is. So if you're going to be an advocate, be a good one. Yeah. I don't want to say that to discourage anyone from doing that, but if you don't have the time, if you've got 6 kids and you just don't think you can pull it off, then that's fine. Nobody is owed or is obligated to do anything, but it's really important that you be an advocate for positive change and make sure that you are pushing for things that will help people. Because again, this isn't about being sinister or being ignorant or having bad intentions. It's about, there are people out there that will exploit your desperation. There are people out there who will try to take advantage of the fact that people are desperate, and we can't let those people win. I mean, we can't let those people take advantage.
Yeah, they're just waiting there to sell us books and sell us creams and sell us this and that, and to push an agenda or anything else. Sell us treatments and say that they're actual medical treatments when they're cosmetic treatments. They are waiting to make a dime, and we have to make sure that the correct information gets out there to protect ourselves. It's not to cut off anybody's belief, anybody's feeling, anybody's choice. Personal choice is important and should be honored, but we also have an obligation to get facts out there. It's just our obligation as an advocate. That's what we do to help the community. That way people can make their own decision off of those facts. So we're not pushing any agenda. We're putting out facts, and then people can then formulate an educated, treatment choice. It's their choice. So that's what we do as MS advocates, and that's very important. Now, this spring, Dr. Stiles and Brett Drummond with MS Translate will be developing a radio show here on our network. So starting this spring, MS&Me Radio Network will be bringing you a full day each week focused on research and clinicians called Research Radio. So that's already being developed for you guys, and we really appreciate you joining us, Dr. Stiles. I mean, it's just beyond helpful to get this information out there to the MS community.
No, and I'm always happy to help and always happy to be a part of what you guys are doing. I think it's excellent.
Oh, thank you so much. So you can come back anytime, and we're really looking forward to your show. And of course, that series that you're doing with MS Translate, we'll all be following that as well.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. So I hope people like it.
I think they will. You guys are always informative. Now, thank you all for joining us this week. We'll continue to bring you more interviews from the clinical and research world, in addition to the episodes from our #WeHave MS series.